Well, spring season is upon us, and with spring season is spring cleaning. And if you have grown up in Calgary, you know, as a gardener, that you don't plant anything before this weekend because you still might get frost or snow, and some of you even experienced hail yesterday. So hopefully not any of you planted flowers before the hailstorm in northern Calgary, and maybe it went all the way through the city. I just heard about those in the north that got it, but it is the season for spring cleaning. And so not just outside, and I've already seen my neighbors working hard cleaning the grass and getting rid of debris, but in the house, it's a time to clean and freshen things up. I remember, and some of you that have been here longer than 8 years may remember Rick Scruggs, our previous lead pastor. Rick Scruggs was notorious for throwing things away. And so if it didn't get used or moved in about a year, he would throw it away. And so as a staff, we would do an annual spring cleaning here in the building. And sometimes I would have to hide things so that Rick would not throw them away, because I knew that we may not have used it this year, but next year we would need it. So me and some of the other staff would be hiding things so that Rick didn't throw things away. Every family probably has some sort of legend or legendary story of something that got thrown away that was precious during spring cleaning. Often, some of you would have been maybe even millionaires with your hockey card collection if it wasn't for your mom and spring cleaning, right? Back in 2019, some of you might remember the Netflix series Tidying Up with Marie Kondo, where she was a cleaning guru. And I remember watching her just being entranced by how amazing and immaculate everything got put together in her household. And so I was watching, and I became a bit of a student of some of her cleaning philosophies. And so I was learning how to fold clothes from Marie Kondo. And so one day I went up to my wife and I said, okay, I know you love doing laundry and you fold the clothes, and I appreciate that, but you're folding the t-shirts wrong. Can you fold it this way for me? Can you imagine what my wife said to that? 40 years I've been folding laundry this way. I do not need someone to tell me I'm doing it wrong. Neither do I need you to tell me I'm doing it wrong. So to this very day, she folds the laundry, and then I refold my t-shirts. Interesting thing with Marie Kondo, though, when she welcomed her, this happened after she welcomed her third child, she shared in the Washington Post, I've kind of given up on that whole way of cleaning, but it's been good for me. I now realize that it's important for me to enjoy spending time with my children at home. And she just found that it was too hard to try to keep up with her own style with 3 kids running around. And so parents around the world had a bit of a sigh of relief that they were okay in their messy homes and didn't have to live up to a particular standard. But regardless if we love spring cleaning or we abhor it, I think all of us would recognize the value in decluttering. The idea of having less stuff in the corners, on the counters, in the cupboards, in the closets, in the basement, in the storage, that there's something freeing about that. There's something that helps us work better, breathe better, move forward. And so spring cleaning is actually an important thing. Jesus talks about spring cleaning, as we just got a taste of that in Cameron's reading of the passage in Matthew chapter 12. Certainly in the same way in our spiritual lives, we need spring cleaning. We need times in our life where we're getting rid of the junk, the mess, the things that clutter and burden us. We need to do spring cleaning. So Jesus shares this interesting parable with his audience in Matthew chapter 12, talking about, and some translations may call it, an unclean spirit. I'm just going to reread the text. The text that I'm going to read for you is from the New Revised Standard Version. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it wanders through waterless regions, looking for a resting place, but it finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. When it returns, it finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Spring cleaning happened. Then it goes and brings 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and live there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So it will be also with this evil generation. These are sobering words, intriguing words from Jesus. It describes a person from whom a demon had been cast out. And for a time there was cleanliness and order and sanity, but there was also vacancy, emptiness. And it's that vacancy, that emptiness, that Jesus says can become dangerous. Because when the house is empty, even if it's clean, it is still vulnerable. So I have 2 visuals this morning that I thought might be helpful. And I think they represent what all of us need to do. And the first one is some spring cleaning, represented by the broom. This one's a little worn, as you could tell. So it's Jesus is not knocking the idea of cleaning our house, our bodies, our life. That's where he starts. Before I unpack the particular passage, let me just highlight a few things here. Jesus is sharing a parable here, a story here, and so he's describing this activity in the spiritual realm. So he's talking about demons, but he is not saying that every person has a demon in them that needs to be exorcised. That's not what he's getting at. He's simply describing a scenario, and the demons become a helpful vehicle to communicate his point. That is not to say, though, that demon possession never happened. It did, and it still does. But here, please hear this. This is a metaphor for what Jesus is talking about, a spiritual delinquency that we all face, that we all wrestle with. That the demon or the evil is representative of the evil within our lives that we wrestle with, that causes clutter and burden, challenge, destruction. And because of that, this is what makes this passage so chilling. Not because it speaks of demons, but because it reveals a deeper truth, the danger of spiritual emptiness. A life cleaned up outwardly but left inwardly is not safe. It's vulnerable. So what's so dangerous is it has the form of godliness, but there's no power. There's no inner life. There's no inner fullness. That's what makes this passage so chilling and the warning so important. So if our Christian life is just modeled after a broom, Jesus warns us that we're headed for trouble. Broom's important, but there's more to the story. So let's unpack this passage a little bit. Let's just talk first off about the nature of evil. Evil is restless unless it has a host. Evil is restless unless it has a host. Notice in verse 43, it talks about this demon that leaves the host, and where does it go? It goes to the desert or an arid place, a place without water. Why would Jesus use that? Is that because the deserts have some sort of special place for demons? Well, certainly at different times people believe that, but I think really what Jesus is getting at is that evil is not satisfied or settled without a host, without it to be embodied in something. And so it was embodied in a host, and then it was cast away, and it's unsettled. And notice the language is, it wants to go back. The second thing with evil is that it's possessive. Now, the NIV, depending on what translation you're reading from, the NLT and the NIV don't word it quite this way, but the Greek highlights this idea of, I will go back, the demon is saying, to my house. Possessive. That this demon is so arrogant and so confident it believes that what it had been cast out of was its house, its ownership over that person. Evil feels like that sometimes. That it demands and deserves to be there in our lives. And evil doesn't just occupy people. Evil drives, tempts, entices, lures, seduces, persuades people to join them in uncleanliness all the time. The third thing is that evil is relentless. It's persistent. It says, I will return. I think that's a sobering reminder that even when we get rid of evil, get rid of clutter, that it wants to come back. It expects to come back. This is not surprising because we're reminded in the Gospel of Luke, where Luke talks about Jesus confronting the devil. And it's interesting, after the devil is tempting Jesus, at the very end of that temptation where Jesus resists the devil, the text says that the devil leaves him waiting for an opportune time. The devil expected to come back. It wanted to come back. So I think there's a consistent theme here about the nature of evil, that it's restless. It's roaming and searching when it's not finding, hungering to consume, and not being ever satisfied, but it expects to come back. Now, the next thing is I think that there is a danger of a clean life without Jesus. So that you can empty the house, you can set it clean and orderly, but there's a danger in that. I was thinking about, empty houses in general. Some people, when they clean out the house, you evict everything that's problematic, and you've got this beautiful but empty house. What happens? There's a tendency for someone or something to want to get back into it. I was visiting a guy last year, and interesting character. We were visiting in Washington State, and he was on his own, bit of a hermit sort of fellow, and he had this massive property, and on this property he had 3 houses, and one of the houses is where his brother had lived, and he was telling us that his brother had died about 5 years ago. And he said, I'd never been back in that house. And I was thinking, so your brother died while he was in the house, and obviously you got the brother out of the house to do the funeral service, but no one has ever been back in that house? It was emptied of your brother's life, but I don't think it's empty of life right now. And I was dreading that it was probably full of rats. But that's the thing. Nature abhors a vacuum. Aristotle said this. Jesus said this about the Pharisees. So this was a group of people that were very religious, they would do lots of good things. So if you looked at their life, you would say, those are godly people. They were called the Pharisees. They had their houses swept clean. They didn't break any outward commandments, and they offered long, demonstrative prayers, and they announced what they were giving with trumpets. They fasted twice a week and made a big show of it, so everyone knew how godly they were. But Jesus had some scathing descriptions of them, like whitewashed tombs. On the outside, beautiful and clean looking, but they were still decrepit and decayed on the inside. He said that these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Jesus tells us in this parable that we just read that after a demon leaves, and if it returns, finding that the house is empty of a person's life, swept clean and put in order, but empty, that it gets excited. It anticipates its new residence, but it will not be alone. It will go out and find friends that are bigger, stronger, more wicked than itself. And Jesus is reminding us at the first stage that Christianity is not about just moral reform. Christianity is not just about sweeping the sin out of our life. Sometimes I've run into people who show up on a Sunday morning and they say, I'm here because it's good for my kids to learn good morals. I want my kids to learn how to be a good citizen, to treat people well. But here's the danger. If that's the extent of what that parent is trying to do in his kid's life, Jesus says it may actually be worse. Where they sweep their life clean, but it's empty. And something worse may come back. Well, what would some of the worst things be? I think that sometimes when we clean up our lives and we leave it empty, that when something comes back that's worse off, it could be pride. Hey, look at my life. I got my act together finally. Look, I'm doing the spiritual habits of Bible reading and praying. Look, I'm giving now to the church and I'm showing up on Sunday mornings. And then we become very prideful. And sometimes that also leads us to greed too, because we start to think, I'm pretty good now, so I deserve these various things. These things are for me. I deserve it because I'm a good person. But it's all a veneer, because there's got to be something better and deeper. You can stop drinking, quit swearing, start waking up early, attending church, all without ever submitting to Jesus. The house may be tidy, but it's unoccupied with the Lord Jesus in the center. Darkness always seeks a place to dwell, but it can't dwell there if Jesus is in the middle. So that is why a self-help Christianity without Christ is ultimately a self-defeat process. A cleaned-up exterior without Christ leaves us vulnerable to the return of bondage that's often worse than before. And it's worse off because it looks good on the surface, but we're just fooling ourselves. Paul, in his description to Timothy, described it this way, and I think he's actually describing so-called godly people. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, he said, people in the last days, people will be lovers of themselves. They'll look like they're loving others, but they'll be lovers of themselves. They'll be lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous and rash and conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. I always thought that he was describing external things that were obvious. But I wonder if Paul was actually describing things that were under the surface, less obvious. Because he said they would have a form of godliness, but not denied any power to it. In fact, Paul says to have nothing to do with such people. It's kind of like painting the walls of a decrepit house, but there's still mold on the inside. It's a waste of time. It gives you the confidence that, hey, I've got a secure house, but you don't see the spores and the mold and realize that it's actually making you very, very sick. The biggest problem, I think, when it comes to spring cleaning in our lives is that we stop at the end of the cleaning part. And Jesus invites us to make the next step. And so quite often for some of us, when we do spring cleaning, and we get rid of, let's say, furniture, things that are broken, things that don't fit anymore, what do we like to do? We get excited if we can. If the budget allows, we go out and buy some new furniture. Now, this one is not new, but it was new at some point, and we were quite excited to buy this. This was like our first big furniture purchase that wasn't like a secondhand store. And I think that this chair, what I want this chair to represent today is a throne. That's what I think that we need in our lives, in our houses, in our spiritual lives, is after we've done the cleaning and moved out everything, that we have to put something in its place, and that's a throne. Now, my wife tells me that we have a throne, and she lets me sit on the throne every so often, so maybe that's a good thing. But reality is that the throne can't be us. It's got to be Jesus. And when we have a throne in our life, when we have that piece of furniture in our life, it starts to dictate what's important. It dictates the value, the significance of everything that happens afterwards. When we've created space to bring in something new, the throne with Jesus sitting on it tells us what's important to add to. Otherwise, we just start to add in more clutter and just other things that will break or be not as important. And so I think we need the broom, but we also need the throne in our lives to dictate the value. I think we have to, and so what does it take to fill a house with the one who saves? We have to go deeper and further. We have to set up a throne. I think every household does have a throne. It may not look like this chair, but it's there. And the one that we put on it really dictates if our house is going to be in order and strong, or it's just going to be worse than before. Some houses have their throne and it looks like a table with an open Bible that's got notes on it. That's their throne. Where they come before the throne and they learn and listen every day and say, Lord, tell us what's important. Some houses have a throne that's represented by maybe a smaller chair, a stool, or a bed where there's a bit of a worn spot or maybe even a piece of carpet in front of the bed where someone bows down on their knees and prays regularly and says, Dear Jesus, tell me what's important. Tell me what I need to do. Tell me how to fill my life with things that are lasting and significant. When Jesus takes up residence on the throne of our lives, the house isn't just clean, it becomes alive. The heart isn't just organized, it's guarded. That we don't just avoid sin, but we get to walk in power. When Jesus dwells within, the enemy does not get a foothold. He comes knocking, he tries to press in, but he finds that the house is not only occupied, but it is governed by the King of Kings. That we start to are mindful of the fact that we are not just moral people, but we are a new creation. That our identity has been changed. That we don't just worry about avoiding evil, that we are able to overcome evil. I think that is what happens when we do the cleaning, but we also set up the throne and put Jesus in it. Can you imagine if we did more of that, if we took the time to do spring cleaning in our lives? Lots of our ministries are about that. We've got men's ministry that talks about spring cleaning in our lives, getting rid of stuff. But it doesn't stop there, does it? Our women's ministry, same thing. Our youth ministry, same thing. Our children's ministry, same thing. That it comes back to, and I think the Christian message is, it's not about just getting rid of the immoral stuff, but it's to set up the throne, to put Jesus in there. And so if you're here this morning and you've not yet done that, I invite you to seriously consider what it would take to put the throne of Jesus in the middle of your house, in the middle of your life. And maybe you've done that already, and I would encourage you that every day you need to set up the throne of Jesus in your life. Every day you have to say, Lord, how can I serve you? Lord, how can I honor you? How can I worship you? And when we do that, our homes, our lives will be much stronger. It will be beautiful because the King is in residence there. I came across this thing. Some of you may have heard this before. It's a particular way of doing cleaning, and it's pronounced dostanding. Some of you may have heard it as Swedish death cleaning. Kind of a morbid term. But I was reading about what this sort of concept is all about. And it's this idea that we have gathered so many things in our lives, and then we die, and guess who gets to handle all the mess? It's our kids. And so the Swedish death cleaning was all about relieving the pressure that we give to our kids about cleaning up our own mess. And so this is where this concept, and it just didn't come up with the Swedes, but lots of other people do this, but they have different names for it. And so as I was reading about it, I thought, well, this is kind of applicable in some ways about what it looks like to do cleaning. First off, it's not just for people over 50. So even as a young person, we could be doing spring cleaning or Swedish death cleaning in our lives. It should be a slow and ongoing process. And I think that's very true. They say as you sort your home, you should think about your will, your memorial service, and the inheritance you leave behind. In a sense, you should be thinking about your legacy. And so when we are cleaning our lives, we should be thinking about the legacy. If we do pass away quickly, no matter how old we are, how young we are, what is the legacy that we're leaving behind? They say you should vocalize your intentions. Tell your friends about your plans so that you're being held accountable. That's how that helps me out a lot. If I tell someone I'm doing something, then I'm held accountable and I have to follow through. And so often big challenges, I like to tell people not to brag and say, oh, I'm going to do this great thing. It's really, for me, it's to hold myself accountable so I don't chicken out at the last second. And the last thing they say is start with your closet. And I thought, that's rather interesting too, that if we're prepared to do some cleaning, some spring cleaning, start with a closet. That's the place where we like to hide stuff, forget about stuff. But it's still there, and once in a while life cracks open that door, and if our closet is full of junk, sometimes it's overwhelming and it falls on us and we're taken out for a little bit. But in the midst of all that, don't stop there. But set up the throne. Put Jesus on the throne so that he'll help you take that next step and fill your home with beautiful, lasting, and significant things.